everyone, and welcome back to episode number 18 of the Mixology Talk podcast, where we talk about cocktails and mixology in a way that you can actually kind of understand.
Yeah, so today we're going to be covering one of the simplest of topics, pun completely intended.
Why did you choose that word, Chris?
Because I am so smart and creative, but we're going to be covering simple syrup and a couple ideas on how to infuse flavor into it and kind of increase the flavor factor of your cocktails.
But before we go too crazy, I think simple syrup is a perfect name for it because it really is extremely simple. But the trouble is that I don't know about you, but before I was in this sort of cocktail world, I had no idea what simple syrup was. It sounded kind of fancy to me because I could only find it in fancy food stores. So I think we should start off with just what is it and how do you make it? Right.
And if you'd go down the cocktail aisle or the spirits aisle in a lot of stores, you can actually see a couple of companies actually producing a simple syrup. I guarantee you after listening to this, you'll never buy one of those containers ever again. And it's like $6 for like...
It's like $7.
Yeah, like 8 ounces or 16 ounces. It doesn't matter.
We are in the wrong business.
I know, seriously. A bar above simple syrup. Buy it now. $5.
$12. It's extra fancy.
So, yeah, basically simple syrup is equal portions water and sugar. And all you have to do is make sure that the sugar dissolves in the water.
And the result that you get after that is a sweet water. Like, it really is that simple. You
really is that
sugar,
simple.
You put it in water, and you stir it up until it dissolves.
So you remember when you had a lemonade stand back in the day, 50 years ago in my case?
Like we all did.
But lemonade was just basically simple syrup, water with sugar, and lemon juice. So simple syrup is used to kind of balance out the citrus or the acid in a lot of fruit and cocktails.
Yeah, so just like there are a lot of cocktails that use various kinds of sweeteners, often with tequila cocktails, you'll see agave nectar being used. That's a sweet syrup. I've seen cocktails with maple syrup. I've seen cocktails with molasses. These are all sweet syrups. And simple syrup is the simplest of them. Basically what it is it's kind of like adding sweet to your cocktail without adding any other flavor. It's a blank slate.
Right. It really is. So there's a couple different ways to make it, and you can get as technical and, geek out as much as you want on simple syrup. Trust me, I do. But it's basically just 1 portion of water to 1 portion of sugar, and you just dissolve it. Now, if you heat it up, then it does kind of crazy things to the molecular bond between the two sugars. See what happens.
Don't do this, Chris.
But it will change. It is
simple. Let's keep it simple.
It'll change the complexity or the body of the simple syrup. So, anyways,
the simplest way to getting back out of the molecular level, because we don't need to be there. There's a couple different ways to make it, and it's funny because I found people who absolutely swear by all of these different ways, and they say that their way is better than the others. I'm just not convinced because I think that, frankly, this stuff is very similar. When you only have 2 ingredients, they can't be that different.
Exactly.
So way number 1 is and all 3 of these ways use the same proportions. You're going to use, let's say, for example, 1 cup of water and 1 cup of sugar. So way number 1 is to put a cup of water and a cup of sugar and stir them together cold until they dissolve. Or do you put them in a cocktail shaker?
You can just put them in a cocktail shaker and shake it until it all dissolves.
Without ice, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yeah.
So it's not heated up in any way. You're just shaking it up until it dissolves. That's way number 1.
Yeah, and way number 2 is just to bring water to a light boil, and add the sugar in there and remove it from the heat and make sure that the sugar dissolves. So I think there was a pivotal temperature on there. If you keep it over 140 degrees for over a couple of minutes, it's going to fracture those 2 bonds. Look at me. You're doing geeking it out again. So, yeah, basically that's one way of doing it. The other way...
the third way... Yeah, I'm not going to let him do it again.
Myself.
I'm saving them from you. Sorry, sweetie. The third way is just to take it a little bit further, and that is to get a cup of water, boil it like crazy, add sugar, and keep boiling it for a little while. That's it. And that's the only difference, is basically the temperature. And again, I've heard people really swearing by the difference in these methods. The only thing I can possibly think of is that if you are adding heat, especially if you're leaving the water on the heat for a long time, you might get some evaporation of the water and maybe get a little bit of a thicker syrup. But I really don't know that's going to be a huge effect if it's only a couple minutes.
Right, especially if you're making cocktails at home, because that first time you make the cocktail, you'll adjust the balance and you'll end up with a great cocktail. And then you just repeat that process every time you make that drink.
Yeah. I will say one thing, and that is there's one thing that a lot of people do wrong when they make simple syrup. And I was totally guilty of this in the beginning as well. And that is, let's say you're going to use a cup of sugar and a cup of water, and you're like me and hate doing dishes, so you only use one container. You use like a 2-cup measuring cup, you fill it halfway up to the 1-cup mark with sugar, and then you just fill it with water until it gets to the 2-cup mark.
Yeah.
1 + 1 is 2. I learned this.
The problem with this one is that once you add the sugar or the water, it begins to melt the sugar, and then the volume compresses the sugar, and what you're going to be left with is a syrup that's much more watery than you expected it to be.
Basically, the water fills in the cracks between the sugar granules, and you end up with the wrong proportion. So do the dishes, do it twice, and be careful to use the same proportion. Don't be lazy like I was.
Yeah, and now, some beautiful things about simple syrup is the fact that it's so high in sugar that it actually stays good in your fridge for quite a few weeks. You can use simple syrup for anywhere between 2 to 3 weeks, no problem.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely a good thing. Although one thing I will say is if it does go bad, it is so cheap to make some more that it's really not a big deal.
Right, you don't have to go to the store and buy $5 worth of simple syrup.
Don't do that. If anybody
or call me, I'll make it for you. Totally.
That's true. I was going to say, if I find out that any of our listeners, after listening to this episode, bought simple syrup at the store, I think we may not be friends anymore.
Right, exactly. But another thing to remember is that if you add alcohol, just vodka, to your simple syrup, it'll actually increase the shelf life of it. So instead of like 2 to 3 weeks, you can keep it in the fridge much longer.
And actually, there's another way to make it keep longer, and that is actually going to take me to our next topic, which is common variations. Mm-hmm. Now, it might be hard to imagine that something so simple could actually have variations, but basically what you do here is you just play with the ratios. So I'm sure everybody's had a cocktail that was just way too sweet. And then we've also had cocktails that needed more sweetener. And playing with the ratios in the simple syrup is one of the ways to actually adjust the sweetness.
Right.
So I kind of think of it as there being kind of 3 different kinds. The first of which I think is referred to as a light simple syrup, although I never see this one. This one's pretty rare. And that is 1 part sugar to 2 parts water.
Exactly, yeah. And at the end of the day, it just is a little bit more watery on the cocktail. But that's not a bad thing, especially if you're using really intense, kind of rich ingredients. That extra water could actually be really beneficial to the cocktail. I've used this in a couple of cocktails in the past, and it is kind of handy to know that all you have to do is increase the water content a little bit. The other one is just your standard simple syrup, which we've been talking about, equal portions. Mm-hmm. And then the last one is you're going to actually increase the amount of sugar and double it. So it's going to be 1 part of water to 2 parts of sugar.
This one is absolutely my favorite. Not surprisingly.
The common term for this in a bar world is rich simple syrup.
And the thing I actually like about rich simple syrup is not actually the fact that it's sweeter, although I do love that a lot. But what I like about it is you can put it in your freezer. It will keep forever and ever and ever, and it will never freeze. So you can actually use it instantly. You can just pull it out of your freezer. Yeah, it's going to be kind of goopy, but you can totally still measure with it and put it into your drink. The beauty of this is that it never ever goes bad. And even if if your cocktail called for a normal or a light simple syrup, you could still keep that syrup in your fridge and just mix it in with water.
Absolutely. So now the next topic is how do we increase the flavor of the simple syrup? How do we put more flavor, fun stuff into the cocktail? And it's super easy, and it's basically just making a tea if you think about it like that. Mm-hmm. So, like, for example, you could literally just make tea like chamomile or Earl Grey and just add equal portion of water, and all of a sudden you have either a chamomile or an Earl Grey simple syrup.
Yeah, that's basically how I make tea. I just do 1 part sugar to 1 part water, and then I steep it in tea. That's right. My recipe.
Sweet tea, I guess.
Is that wrong? Is that not the right way to make it?
We don't judge on this podcast, but we're totally judging.
But yeah, I mean, tea is a very simple infusion, and when you're working with something like simple syrup, which is to a large extent water, you've got a great opportunity to start playing with infusions. And so something like tea is a really simple way to go. You could also do things things like, I know, Chris, I think we've done citrus infusions. We've done
herb
fruits,
infusions.
A lot of herb. Chris does a really, really tasty rosemary simple syrup that he used, especially in the fall.
Yeah, you can use those kind of flavored simple syrups a lot. So yeah, do a bunch of different spices together. Even jalapeno or some kind of spicy note in there is a great way to kind of cut through some of that sweetness. It's really nice.
And another thing that I actually would like to say just before we get off this topic is we talked about making simple syrup as using pure white sugar. And the reason that you do that is that you want that blank slate. Usually when a recipe calls for simple syrup, it's because they just want the sweetness without the flavor. But that's not the only way to make it. There's a lot of different sugars out there. And if you wanted, for example, to have a simple syrup that had a little bit of that molasses flavor, you could absolutely go and make your simple syrup with brown sugar instead. And that would bring that molasses flavor. And there's all kinds of fun sugars out there. Brown sugar, turbinado sugar, all sorts of things. Don't use powdered sugar. Please, please, please don't use powdered sugar.
Yeah, that cornstarch is definitely going to get in the way. So if you don't know, powdered sugar has a small degree of cornstarch in it to keep it from clumping.
That'll thicken up your cocktail.
Right, exactly.
So don't use powdered sugar. I think there's I want to say ultra fine. I want to say there's a kind of sugar called ultra fine sugar, which is basically powdered sugar, but it doesn't have the cornstarch. So if you find that, go to town, go crazy. But again, that doesn't have any flavor. So just go use the cheap stuff.
Exactly. So another really cool thing about making simple syrups and flavored simple syrups, this is something I learned from one of my friends, is like when you use it for fruit that has a real high water content, let's say like strawberries or watermelon or cantaloupe or something like that, you basically, all you have to do is macerate the fruit, basically add sugar to the top of the fruit, and that'll extract a lot of the natural juices and the sweeteners, and then you add that to water to kind of cut it down, but all of a sudden you have a really nice, bright, simple syrup that has a flavor of whatever fruit you just macerated with it.
So to sort of tell that story again without the big words, you just, because I don't know the big words. You basically just, do you remember, I don't know about you, but my grandmother did this. When I was growing up, my grandmother grew strawberries in her garden, and she would chop them up and put them in a big bowl and then sprinkle sugar over the entire bowl and then let it sit. And I never understood why she let it sit, because I always wanted to eat it like right this second, but she was super adamant. And now I know why, because the sugar actually brings the juices out of the fruit, and it results in that syrup getting even more of the flavor. So it's almost kind of like an infusion where the flavor is coming out of the fruit and into the sugar itself. But yeah, so macerate is just put sugar on it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's a fancy word for putting sugar on it.
We're fancy people.
We are fancy people. So yeah, that's an easy way to add flavor into your cocktails, is through that method.
So I think we've covered pretty much everything there is to say about simple syrup. Again, I hope that now that you know how to make it, you'll never ever buy it. And really, don't worry about it.
Buy it from us. I'll totally make it for you.
But just remember, it's really hard to mess it up. And if you do mess it up, all you've ruined is some really inexpensive white sugar and some water. So just go to town, play with it, have some fun with it. I think it's really worth trying.
And yeah, make some fun flavors, especially during the holidays when we have all of these really cool spices that we use in cooking, vanilla and all these other fun flavors. It is a great way to really kind of experiment with cocktails and make something even more special that, if you're having a dinner party or you're entertaining family, it kind of brings up the awe.
It does. The wow factor.
The wow factor.
And actually, that's a really good point, Chris, is that a lot of people, when they think of infusing things with flavor, they think of vodka. But if you're going to infuse something and you don't want to invest the money, simple syrup's a great way to go, because you don't have to throw away vodka if it goes horribly wrong.
Exactly. And it's kind of a gateway drug into, cocktail design and, making your own fun cocktails.
I think this whole podcast is kind of a gateway drug.
Yeah, I think we should just change the name of the podcast.
We should change the subtitle. Mixology Talk, the gateway drug into Mixology.
We might get flagged for that one, though.
Yeah, that's true. Well, thank you so much, everyone. With all this talk of syrup, I think I'm going to go find some sugar to eat.
Oh, my.
That's normal, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Also, I'm going to brush my teeth.
Right, exactly. So that's it for this time, and thanks again for joining us. So go make a tasty cocktail and let us know how it goes on our Twitter profile @abarabove.
And if you are interested in geeking out even deeper, we actually made some videos on our website at A Bar Above about simple syrup, infusing it with flavor, rich simple syrup, and testing it out in cocktails. So if you head on over to mixologytalk.com/18, 18, we'll include the links to all those videos, and you can geek out.
So what's next? What's the next episode that we're working with here?
We grew in our garden this year. We grew tomatoes. And we thought we were going to just have tomatoes for salads, and that's great. We are absolutely buried in tomatoes right now.
Yeah.
And so I told Chris he needs to figure out how to make cocktails with them.
So that's what we're going to be doing next week, is we're going to be doing some tomato cocktails. So until then, have a good night, everyone, and we'll talk to you later. Cheers.
Cheers. Never miss an episode by subscribing in iTunes or YouTube. And as always, check out the show notes by clicking on the right.